Hello and welcome to the second in our TelecomTV main agenda panels on SDN and NFV Service Provider Impact, sponsored by HP and Intel. In this programme we will be discussing just why service providers need to embrace and implement software-defined networking and network functions virtualization, and just what specifically will be the benefits to the operator and to their enterprise and consumer customers. In our TelecomTV survey, the overwhelming majority of respondents are clear that SDN and NFV will significantly reduce OPEX and CAPEX for the telcos, while also enabling faster and more efficient delivery of services to the customer. So we know that. But what services will be the winners in the new SDN NFV enabled network? Where will the savings be derived? And what changes will the operators have to make operationally and culturally to derive maximum business benefit for themselves and their customers? Here to answer these questions and others, I am joined by John Woodget from Intel, Matt Foley of HP, Tilley from Alcatel-Lucent, and Colin Bannon from BT. So let's get started. Gentlemen, welcome. I'm going to begin by asking you, Colin, if I might, seeing as you're the nearest,
okay,
as good as anything else. First of all, why is SDN and NFV so particularly important at this particular time in the history of networking, a history that goes back a very long time?
Well, I think from BT's perspective right now, looking at it, is complexity has got more and more. Costs have got more and more. NFV in particular, for us, for BT, is a way to, there's some really tantalizing options on how we can save some money, be able to be more agile, and also be able to provide value-added services to our customers. There's some really interesting things that we think we could do with it. But obviously, right now, we're really looking for more standards that are open. As a service provider, service providers need to connect to each other. And really, from that perspective, service providers have different equipment, and that equipment needs to be able to talk to each other. So if we're moving into this next phase and next set of capability in terms of the transformation of networks, we really need these equipment vendors. We need open standards. We need the standards to be able to allow the equipment to work with each other and for equipment to work with each other. Now, BT is very proud that we created or helped form the Network Functions Virtualization Industry Standard Group with ETSI. And the reason we chose ETSI was that the barrier to entry, you don't have to be a member to get into this industry standard group. And for that purpose, we started with about 13 service providers. And what we've done is, since then, in the 9 months since we issued the initial white paper, we've grown to about 125 members. And that includes 24 Tier 1 carriers. And for us, it's really important as a group to ensure that we have an end-to-end architecture described, and an end-to-end business cases and use cases described, and understand as an industry, as a forum, as a group, to really understand what are the key scenarios, what are the key use cases. Because first is a reach of, what does it mean? How do we really leverage this new paradigm of working? And as an industry group, what we want to ensure is that we have the right scenarios, that we prioritize those scenarios, we understand the architecture end-to-end, and that the right standards are created so that, most importantly, our customer service is supported with clean end-to-end seamless interworking between the service providers. So the more that we can, because each vendor is working on their own version of SDN and NVF, and what we wanted as an industry standards group, leading that industry, helping drive that industry standard group, is to ensure that everyone plays nice. Yeah, yeah. As service providers.
Well, let's stop you there. Are you playing nice? You see, this is a service provider here. He's talking to vendors and product manufacturers and he's basically saying, look, it'd really be good if all this stuff did work together and we all could be friends. Is that what's happening? Phil, let's get it from you first.
Yeah, so obviously as an equipment provider, then that is the gauntlet thrown down, I guess, and has been thrown down to us. And certainly I think we've been listening to, for a number of years, our customers have been sort of making this claim, is we cannot keep delivering services at the speed we want to do with the complexity of integration required of the component. And I think in particular we've seen in the cloud area where the speed at which applications and application developers can develop new applications, onboard them onto equipment and machines is far accelerated where and how quickly we can make the connections between the data center and the end user. So I think SDN sort of for us has been a great opportunity to come and say, how can we improve and facilitate and make the faster connections from the data center to the end user? We see then obviously the natural evolution of that is actually, well, once you do that, then let's make sure we can onboard NFV and the functions.
Okay, Matt, what about you?
I think the challenge here, of course, is well stated. The operators, due to their history, to a great extent, are the world's largest operational computer museums, and curating that or working through that is difficult. It's a significant operational challenge to keep that kind of diversity up and running. The other challenge, I think, that's also worth looking at is the regulatory environment and the way that the vendor management, for example, is structured. So in order to provide SLAs, vendors historically have provided the top-to-bottom integration of the application in order to maintain that commitment. Well, now we're taking the siloed world and essentially turning it on its side and providing it in layers. And so a lot of what the NFV standards are about and what we're about is being able to we're being able to shift this technically, which is one important thing, and I think we understand how to do this, but culturally, in a regulatory environment, legally, from a SLA type of perspective, those are other issues that I think we look to the operators and the standards bodies in order to really figure out.
John, what's your take on that?
Well, absolutely agree with everything that's been said so far, and there's a much larger challenge in the long run to actually take this transformed network and then start figuring out, so what are the services that the service providers can deliver differently? At the moment, network function virtualization is completely changing the game of how you operate a network end to end and horizontalize the network functions. What then needs to sit on top of that is the ability to deliver differentiated network services. So there's a long game to be played here, and it's delightful to see the service providers taking the initiative to drive this standards approach, because it's not in the best interests of any of the traditional network equipment providers to go and give away all of their IP and probably not get anything back in terms of creating a standards initiative. So it really requires the service providers to get on the front foot, lean forward and show the industry the way, and then the industry, I think, will follow. And it's fascinating to see, and it really emerged big time at the Mobile World Congress this year when the network equipment manufacturers were openly talking about showing what they are thinking. So I don't think there's any secrets here. Everybody sees what the game is, but it's a careful business management process, because cultures have to change in the equipment providers, cultures have to change in the service providers.
Matt, you were nodding away there. What were you going to say?
Oh, it's very much in agreement with John. And one of the challenges that we have from an industry with the legacy or the telecom, the service providers, is we'd like to challenge them to use the advantages that you have in terms of proximity, in terms of latency, in terms of this distributed network. That, building upon that base, physically the operators are closer to all of their customers than anybody else, just physically from a location perspective. And being able to leverage that asset is really what we hope as an industry to enable you to do.
Okay, Colin, back to you. You talked about ETSI, you talked about standards. Does SDN and does NFV require a global standard to work properly, to allow the full potential of the technologies?
Right now, it's very fluid. There are a number of complementary bodies that are working on various standards that are evolving. A number of various vendors are contributing to each of the areas. What we're trying to do is make sure that the scenarios that we can work with all of these bodies, and I think the bodies are relatively complementary to each other in terms of each of the layers and each of the pieces of the pie that provides the whole. And what we want to make sure is that we can take these scenarios and then move into proof of concepts and run some of these case studies to actually prove this in an environment. What we're seeing is, from a software-defined networking perspective, you see quite rapid adoption and evolution in the data center environment. What we want to understand is what the implications are is taking it out into the WAN environment and how we can leverage that. But also from the network function virtualization, we want to make sure that those cases we can really take advantage of compute environments and the flexibility provided by compute environments, that you can push applications, run applications virtually. And really, in my mind, the way I think of it is it's connecting a feedback loop, via the software. So it's making the network more intelligent to enable cloud. One of the big challenges for cloud is you've got a lot of intelligence going on in the data center. How do you extend that intelligence and that connection and that orchestration and that feedback loop into the WAN environment?
Okay, can I move on? Not stopping you completely, I'll come back to you in a minute.
Sure.
But I want to bring Phil in again here. So what's Alcatel-Lucent doing to enable this?
So I think there's a couple of areas. You're absolutely right, Colin. First of all, the data center. How do you build software-defined networking within the data center? But more importantly, extend that. So actually, to what we term software-defined VPNs. So actually, how do you have virtual CPE or bare metal CPE or configurable CPE? So actually, you're extending that SDN concept to a virtualized CPE device rather that is open, that could be a platform you load different applications on. And when you make that connection, you're making a connection seamlessly from a virtual machine in a data center all the way to the end user CPE device, and it's got policies applied, whether it's security policies, firewall policies, load balancing, whatever. All that thing is seamlessly defined.
But John, sorry to interrupt you, but John, it seems to me that the proof of the pudding in here will be in the eating, if ever it was going to be. We've been talking about the long term of this is providing better services, more agile services, more quickly, and enabling more profit, more revenues, etc. Is that? Do you see any sign of that happening now?
No, not yet.
That's a straight answer.
And I think it's interesting, this recent survey, it expresses the view that the network function virtualization is seen as similar to SDN in making the service providers competitive. Mm-hmm. And then the other question on timing is most of the service providers see this happening in a couple of years. Mm. I think there's a misunderstanding of the degree of the complexity and the degree of change that's required throughout the network for this to happen. And I applaud the NFV initiative, and that will enable cost savings in the network function virtualization. But if we're really to move into a network services arena where the network delivers differentiated services from the over-the-top guys, then we need a far more pervasive distribution of this new computing paradigm throughout the networks. And it's throughout the mobile networks and the fixed networks. So I think this is going to be similar to the data center transformation, which took 10 to 15 years to get us where we are today. And if anything, it's a more complex, distributed environment in the network. So the technology accelerates, so maybe 10 to 15 years is the length of time that we're talking about. But are these services appearing now? No. Are people experimenting with concepts around big data analytics, personas, services orchestration? Sure. And Intel's involved in encouraging that kind of experimentation, and that's what needs to happen. So that's part of the cultural change. So network operators are yesterday. Cloud services operators are today. And the cloud services model and culture does not yet exist in the operators. So that's the biggest change in a way. It's a mentality change. It requires leadership from the service providers to actually change from the management, because I think the top levels of management understand this game. But as with all large corporations, there's a huge middle management job being done to maintain the status quo. That's what's got to change, and that's a huge challenge.
Okay, the challenge is there. What are you doing about it?
Well,
I mean, I just want to embroider on this a
Sure.
little, if I might. We've talked briefly around the cultural aspects of this. Mm-hmm. I think John's nailed it, really, hasn't he? Because, I mean, BT being a case in point, maybe or maybe not, but any big established incumbent telco, tier 1 telco, something like that, is a mammoth beast. And the culture is ingrained, and this is going to attack that culture and shake it. And one of the things that I've read a lot about recently is the fact that these new SDN and NFV are going to actually shake the foundations of this, and a lot of organisations may chicken out of actually being able to do it properly and sort of come at it half-heartedly. What do you make of that?
I think that's frankly overhyped. To tell you the truth.
That's fair enough.
I think, to speak frankly, NFV is not a threat to the service providers. It's an opportunity to provide additional services and reduce our cost base and increase our agility and allow innovation. Hence, that's why we really help champion this standards body. Part of the reason we wanted this standards body to be open is to allow smaller players to come in. And out of that 125, we want to drive innovation. We want more platforms. We want this platform to be open. We want new ideas and new innovation to come in to add to what we're doing and increase the pace of competitiveness and innovation, and be able to allow us to do clever things. I can give you a few examples of some of the things we're thinking about, and the art of the possible, and allow to provide better services for our customer. On the software-defined networking side, I think it's moving very, very quickly, but primarily in the data center. Software-defined data centers is where it's at. I've just come back from Palo Alto, and speaking to people, the function is about getting that data center orchestration right first. And we agree with that, so how to do that. However, there's a different level of technologies and a different level of realities that you need to deal with from where you're in a data center where you essentially have unlimited bandwidth on the backplane, and you can move things around, to an environment where it's multi-hop, constrained bandwidth, multi-tenanted, where you have bursts and peaks, and you need an intelligent network from that perspective that has a service provider mentality which the service providers excel at. And so there needs to be a meeting between the data center folks and the cloud enablers with the service providers to allow that overlay.
So Colin, I think that this is interesting, because what I see happening in ETSI is a great job being done tackling the network functions.
Yeah.
Right.
What has to happen with ETSI going forwards, and I'm sure this will happen as time unfolds, is there needs to be a real melding of the minds around the cloud services aspect of the network. Because if you don't bring in the cloud services mentality along with this key differentiated network part, all you'll end up with is a cheaper network solution, which is great, but you're really standardizing on hardware and optimizing some of the OpEx costs, but you're not going for the whole enchilada. You're not going for the whole services cloud opportunity.
So I mean, that's certainly from an Alcatel-Lucent perspective where we've been looking and sort of tackling this problem. Actually, we've got a cloud management system that looks at the whole cloud orchestration layer. That's critical. Then we've sort of gone and got a new area in the SDN, the sort of new company there, Newish Network, sort of looking at that SDN and the data center, actually bringing the two together. The cloud management orchestration layer being almost the test bed to actually bring on the SDN environment as well, to facilitate the networking, and that's been critical, I think, is where we bring the new skills from the IT environment into the traditional telco skills that we've got. All these things, NFV is absolutely easily achievable. The question is, what quality of experience do we risk in accelerating this too far? And I think that's the big challenge and issue is we can do NFV tomorrow, but actually the quality might not be acceptable, therefore where do we balance that?
I mean, the challenge is to do NFV soon, but also to do it right. Without, if you implement it in a half-hearted way or in a way that it maybe emphasizes the wrong values, it won't work. And so as we've gone through our evolution, you can imagine the amount of data center equipment that goes into a lot of different industries, and different industries move towards standard computing over time. Intel experienced that as well. Typically the industry started with a fairly controlled implementation the first time, And then sort of the natural order of things took over, and I'd certainly recommend the same approach to NFV is to start out, build it right the first time, implement that flexible network, get the baseline there, and then as technology and other things evolve, it allows you to really leverage the industry rather than fight against it.
Hey, yeah, one of the questions is how many test beds and where do we test all this stuff out? Right? Do we as a vendor have to do this every single service provider, or actually are there sort of a group or an area, and perhaps this is where we work with Etsy and say actually there is one global test bed and that's Etsy and that's where we do it.
Well, it always reminds me of these, the software houses that say, this is a box, this is a telco in a box, whatever it is. You just plug it in, it'll work, and then you do, and people say, well, yes, it works sort of, but I need this bit and I need this bit adding up. So it becomes a whole bespoke exercise on top of that. Do you think that's what we're looking at a likelihood of again?
I think one of the challenges is definitely, I think, the complexity with openness. You've got so many variables, so many permutations, and that's where the challenges will.
Because sorry, John,
but that's where the opportunity is, because the customer ought to be able to say, well, I want this unique little piece here, and they ought to be able to have a software developer develop it for them on an applications programming interface that is standardized, that means that it's easily maintained. And that's where we've got to break with tradition, because the siloed network functions right now have siloed management software. We don't have a common software management interface that makes that kind of customized application development possible.
And we've talked about culture, we've talked about technology, we've mentioned the cloud. How vital is the entire concept and the application of cloud technology to SDN and NFV? Is it feasible? Would it ever happen without it?
Cloud is important, but what I look at it in particular is about the applications and the end user experience. Yeah, so cloud may be about virtualizing what used to be bare metal in a flexible environment, and exposing those things to the networks and be able to do a software as a service environment. As a service provider, what we're zeroing in is to architect solutions that really focus on the end-to-end customer experience journey of that software experience, whether it be on cloud or whether it be on a bare metal server. To us, it's important to provide that end-to-end experience either way, so it's seamless to the customer. There are right now some applications that our customers are not comfortable to have in a virtualized environment. They still want to have them on dedicated service. Certain vendors out there, software vendors, are working very hard to gain trust. They started with some of the less deterministic applications and virtualized them, less latency sensitive, less mission critical, and they're sort of nibbling away. And I think they've done a really good job at that. However, whether it still be on a dedicated server and a piece of tin in a data center, or whether it be in a virtualized hypervisor-led stack, what we need to be able to do is to have that end-to-end customer experience and the agility. And we're very conscious that in the service provisioning side, you have quite an agile environment now. And what's interesting is you have a number of different environments, and some of those environments people complain about lock-in. Either way, what we need to be able to do is be the cloud broker, and what we would be able to provide our own cloud capability, be able to connect others to other, the users to use other cloud. They may have their own private cloud, private compute capability as well, and really the interworking of that is where we're looking to excel and be able to provide solutions for. And that's one of the key areas of enabling that and monetizing new things. And that constant feedback loop. And if I go back to the application, forget cloud for a second. If you have a voice application or a UC application or a video application and it's running over the network, having a feedback loop from the application into the network that's intelligent enough to inform the network to say, hey, I'm getting in trouble. My user experience is starting to degrade because there's a number of other people going on. You can link that intelligence together and orchestrate perhaps a bandwidth increase, perhaps a quality of service tweak, perhaps some additional compression or acceleration. Having this all, so I think of this as a hybrid solution, and I think of it as a brokering solution, and I think of it as an end-to-end experience, but really putting the customer first at the end. Yeah?
Well, it's a good note to end on, because I'm being shouted at, I'm here to say our time is up, because once more the clock has beaten us, I'm afraid. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. We'll come away with a deeper insight as to how and why SDN and NFV have the potential to revolutionise the global communications industry. You know, Hippocrates, back to my Latin lesson, said, Ars longa vita brevis occasio praeceps experimentum periculosum iudicum difficile. And that means art is long, life is short, opportunity is fleeting, experience perilous, and decisions difficult. And how true of that is that of the global communications industry. But if a fleeting opportunity, or an opportunity at all, is grasped and difficult decisions are taken, then SDN and NFV will make life a little easier, if not actually longer, for us all. So, thanks for watching, and goodbye for now. If you want to download the full findings of our survey, you can, via a hyperlink not far from this player window.